Welcome to another video where the ordinary becomes terrifying and the unexplained creeps into reality. Tonight, we step into the shadows of a haunted hospital where long night shifts unveil things that defy logic. Ghostly whispers, eerie movements, and a horned figure with a sinister grin. Are you ready to uncover the horrors lurking in the darkness? Until this week, I worked for a local hospital in an American city of high crime, so the night shift wasn't exactly quiet to begin with. I worked in the lab as a microbiologist assistant to gain lab experience, as finding a job with my degree is difficult with only college experience. Anyway, my shift started at 6 p.m. and ended at 4:30 the next morning for 7 straight days, and the pay, even with premium shift hours, was hardly worth it. Still, I needed the lab experience, and my shift had the best co-workers and supervisor I could ask for, at least in the lab. It was common to have patients pass in the night. Patients arrive with severe psychological issues, and even patients who left against medical advice, who were struck by passing cars on the busy roads near the hospital. The other departments were also full of negative energy that seemed to create a storm of paranormal phenomena on a daily or rather nightly basis. The first incident happened on the 9th floor, which was unoccupied except for CPR dummies, a couple of rarely used offices, and some stored equipment. The place was eerie during the day, and no one liked to go up for anything at night. When I first started, I was not CPR certified and had to go past the training, which was all automated and technically needed no other people besides the participant. Anyone who has done CPR training knows these dummies are not exactly the best for one person to use. But I figured I could get some of the training done before the shift was too busy. So I took the elevator up and arrived to find many lights off, except for a handful of flickering lights by the old nurse's station, and the CPR room was well lit. Go figure, right? I was immediately uneasy and felt like I was under watch. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, but I dismissed it as being the only person on the floor and pushed forward. I thought I saw a man once or twice in the shadows, but chalked it up to being exhausted and already on edge. I was halfway through the training when everything shut down on the floor, except the child mannequin, which began crying. They were not programmed to make any noise like that. I fled and only finished my training with others later that day, when thankfully nothing occurred. Once I was put on night shift, the lab became manned by a skeleton crew. I was regularly alone in my area, if not alone in the whole lab for 20-60 minutes at a time. This didn't bother me too much, as frankly, I enjoyed the peace until it wasn't peaceful. I started seeing glimpses of people moving over the machinery or passing the counters into rooms. Usually dark, shadowy glimpses, but sometimes I thought it was a co-worker or a lost patient due to seeing scrubs or gowns. Every time I went to see who it was, there was nothing there. This wasn't a place with many twists and turns, but rather storage rooms, the break room, or even my back corner, where there was only one way in and out. I've seen the unexplained more times than I ever wanted to over the years, and frankly shrugged it off. After all, maybe I was just tired, and maybe the things falling off shelves were just knocked off by shaking equipment, right? Then the bathroom's automatic paper towel dispenser started going off. The lights were on a timer and would go off if movement didn't occur for roughly 90 seconds, which left many staff and patients in the dark, while scrolling their phones or while having a particularly bad day. This is important as many times staff would pass the bathroom while it was dark to hear or even see the dispenser going off. One staff member even joked that he was in a rush and was about to run out without washing his hands when the dispenser went off without him even passing in front of it. Most people know these machines are finicky and sometimes require you to be within an inch of the sensor to even register, so this was odd, but harmless except for the cleaning staff grumbling about wasting the paper. However, one night, the ceiling sprung a massive leak from storms that hadn't let up for days, which took out half the lights in the ceiling for a few weeks. During this night in particular, I turned to see movement out of the corner of my eye on the other side of some shelves. I assumed it was a travel tech looking for equipment and turned to help as the figure had stopped and hunched over. It wasn't him, but instead a black and dark grey figure with small horns on both sides of the forehead, black glistening eyes, and a face warped into a horrifying half-snarl, half-grimace. I froze, frightened, and stared horrified at this thing that frankly looked like an old gargoyle, and a human had been fused. I couldn't make a sound, and part of me wondered if I needed to check myself into the upstairs psych ward for hallucinations. But deep down, I knew I wasn't hallucinating. I was paralyzed, staring as this thing's face began to twist into a horrific grin that stretched wider than physically possible, and then it vanished. I was left in a cold sweat and hurried to the break room where my co-workers had been and stayed until at least one of them returned to the lab. A call later that night from the ED presented me with a patient who had been discharged after a month from the psych ward as the hospital had run out of viable options for her and her family. Quite literally, tossed her back through the doors just a few hours later. They needed a COVID test run again to get her back into the ward, but the ward did not want her back and was begging a better equipped facility to take her. She was muzzled like a dog after horrifically attacking some of the staff, biting, clawing, spitting, and just acting feral. I don't know what happened to her, but her screaming in the back was chilling and caused the hair on my neck to stand at attention. I don't know if that demon was related to her issues, but I think she may have needed a priest, not a doctor. Now, this demon was not the reason I resigned, but he sure didn't help, and I didn't see him again until the night before I resigned. A patient left against medical advice, although technically I don't think he was fully admitted. He was brought to be admitted to the, you guessed it, psych ward. His caretaker left him before the admitting process was even completed, and the staff on the floor were not the most competent or caring people to be nurses. No one stopped him as he left. No one stopped him as he reached the road. No one could bring him back when a speeding driver flattened him and took off. A hit and run that left a mangled body behind. Morbidly curious, my supervisor and I decided to step outside to see where exactly the crime scene was. And while outside, my supervisor took a smoke break. I stayed with her as the night was actually nice, despite the crime scene just a few yards away, and just chatted when the sheriff for the county drove by, likely being called away as the scene was pretty straightforward and didn't need much to be figured out. He waved as he drove by, but my heart sank as I saw a familiar twisted, grinning face in the passenger seat staring at us. The ashen, horned face of the Gargoyle Man. The night turned cold, and I promptly entered the building where I was hit by the strong, rotting smell of decaying flesh. My supervisor walked in behind me and gagged at the smell, saying an animal must have died in the wall, but we had left through that same door just 5 minutes prior, and there was no smell detected beyond the sanitized bleach smell of the hospital. Many things pushed me to resign, and obviously, I did not count the Gargoyle Man on that letter of resignation, because who would believe me? Still, I will never go back to that hospital as a patient or a staff member. I hope that the gargoyle-faced demonic figure stays away from me, but I'm worried that I'll see him again, and I'm starting to think I should bless my apartment again, just in case. You've just stepped into a world where the unexplained lingers and the shadows hold more than just darkness. If you've enjoyed this story, or if it's left you glancing over your shoulder, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more chilling tales. And remember, some things follow you long after the story ends.